Hey guys, and welcome to Taylor Tech. So as you may remember from my video on doing a major network upgrade, I ended up in a situation at the end of it that was one that no one ever wants to find themselves in. My primary domain controller was no longer responding. I couldn't find it on my network anywhere, and my credentials had timed out on all of my devices, meaning I had to basically rebuild my entire home network after introducing my new switch. The thing that I realized the moment it dawned on me that I had to do a full rebuild was, damn it, I should have had some backups. So today we're going to remedy that situation. We're going to go over what constitutes a backup, some things to consider when you're creating backups for different types of data, and finally we're going to actually set up the backups for my VMs in Hyper-V. So let's get to it. Okay, so what does it actually mean to have data backed up? The way I see it, there are three major criteria that you have to meet to be considered to have good backups of something. The first is that it has to be recoverable, whether that is being able to recover the data or being able to recover the service. It has to be timely, and it has to exist in more than one location. So let's unpack those and go over what they actually mean. The first one, that backups need to be recoverable, is a little bit self-explanatory, but essentially you need to have a good backup that you have verified you can restore with. If in the case of data, it may be as simple as being able to copy the data back to where you need it, or in the case of something like a VM, you need to make sure that you have not just the virtual hard drive of the VM, but all of the configuration information necessary to restore it appropriately. A lot of times people will take what they think is a backup, but really it's just a copy of some data that may not have everything that they truly need to get back to where they were prior to their disaster. So you need to make sure that your backup is actually recoverable. And this goes hand in hand with something we'll talk about later in terms of testing backups. The second thing is that a backup needs to be timely. And what I mean by that is different information has different time horizons on which it is relevant. Something like the photos that you took 2 years ago, a 6-month-old backup of those is probably okay because you took the photos 2 years ago. They haven't changed since then. Likewise, a backup that's 6 weeks old of a virtual machine that's your router for your home network may be a stale backup. It may not have all the configuration information, especially if you've been making changes to your network. And you may find that a 6-week-old backup of that is not going to be very recoverable because you're going to have to go in and reconfigure everything. So they need to be recoverable, they need to be timely, and finally, you need to have multiple copies of something. You need to have data in multiple physical locations. So when I say data has to be in multiple physical locations, it encompasses a few different things. The first is that RAID is not a backup. You'll see a lot of people who feel comfortable that they have, a RAID array that has all of their important data on it, and sure, they're protected against some level of physical loss of either drive or the computer itself, maybe, but they aren't necessarily covered in other situations. I've seen situations where people will store like the configuration information for their FreeNAS box on their FreeNAS box, and then when the FreeNAS box goes down, they realize, oh crap, I can't get to my configuration backups that I made because they're on the box that they were relevant to. So in this case, it doesn't matter that you had made a copy of the backup or made a backup of the configuration and stored it. You stored it on the thing that it was there to help you recover. So you need to make sure you have things in multiple locations so you can access them in the case that one device in your network is down. Another thing that I haven't really talked, that doesn't really fit in necessarily with some of these others, is that it's really a good idea, especially in the case of things that have a very short time horizon for backups, to keep multiple versions. One of the most tragic things you can do is to back something up and know that you have good backups that you've tested, and then realize you're only keeping one version of it, and the backup itself has whatever corruption or issue you're trying to recover from. I've seen that happen professionally. It was ugly, and no, we're damn lucky that we were able to recover from that one at all, let alone fully recover, which we were, thank goodness. But yeah, you need to make sure that you have multiple versions of backups and you're keeping consistent, timely versions of backups, because the last thing you want to do is discover that not only has your environment gone down or that you've lost data, but the backup itself is corrupted. So this can also help with data loss in the case of a bad actor. So if you're keeping multiple, snapshotted versions of your data store and someone goes through and deletes a bunch of things, you can often roll it back. I know in the case of FreeNAS, if you keep snapshots, you can roll back to a snapshot and recover maybe not all of your data, but at least most of it. That's something that I would strongly recommend, is keeping multiple versions of something. With those kind of ideas in mind, let's go ahead and dive into making backups of my VMs. So when I look at my environment, really I need to be able to recover it in a very quick fashion. Since these are the VMs that kind of represent the infrastructure of my home environment, they need to be timely. As I'm making configuration changes, I don't want to have to go and manually take a new backup. I just want to be able to load the last backup that has my most recent configuration. They need to be a backup that doesn't just have the data of the VM, but also has all its configuration settings so that when I try and restore it, it restores faster and it restores completely. And finally, it needs to be something that is reachable even if my hypervisor is not reachable. So if I have to blow away the hypervisor again and reload it, I want to be able to load these backups to it without, and not have them lost when I blow away the hypervisor. To accomplish all this, my plan is to create a new volume on my FreeNAS box that is just for backups, mount it to the hypervisor, and then use a PowerShell script to make copies of make exports of the VMs that I keep about a rolling week's worth of exports. So that way I've got several versions of them. I've got them on a separate physical device, and I have complete restorable backups, because, and I have tested this, the exports can be very quickly loaded and imported into another hypervisor if I have to stand it up on another box or something like that. So so that's the plan right now, and we're going to dive into it. Just a caveat here at the beginning, I'm pretty much a PowerShell noob. I know just a few very basic things. I'm not great with it yet, and I may end up having to do a little bit of web searching during this to make sure that I understand all the commands correctly. It should be pretty basic. Most of it's just going to be file system stuff, but yeah, you never know until you dive into a project like this. So let's go ahead and hop in and get it done.
Okay, guys, let's start this off with the obvious. This is not the shirt I'm wearing in the other part of the video. So what ended up happening is I got into this, and I'll show a few seconds of my uhing and umming. But I got into this and realized I did not know nearly enough to try and get this done in any reasonable amount of time. So after about 45 minutes of fumbling around and realizing this was not going anywhere, I cut the video short and moved on to doing other things for the evening before revisiting it the next night with a fresh mind and knocking it out in like 20 minutes. Isn't that how it always seems to go? So what I'm going to do is go through and try and recreate the steps I took to build my script to do my backups. The one thing I haven't done yet, and that's because I just finished it yesterday, is schedule it to run on a nightly basis. So let's go ahead and start with getting FreeNAS set up. So I'll get a window and make sure OBS is cooperating. We'll go to freenas.davishome.info, which is my FreeNAS box, root, and log in. So let's go to, I made myself a new data set, which is this Mount Davis Home backup, and set it up just to have my permissions. So ideally, oh, that's right, I did put backup admin. I created an account called backup admin. I was having trouble getting it to authenticate with that. I was able to get it to authenticate through my user. So we'll see how it works with the schedule task. I believe I can schedule it as me. Now that's bad practice. In general, having a service account like this backup admin account is what you really want to be doing. But if it's in a lab environment, not a production environment, it's not really a big deal, because you're going to be screwing around with it anyway, because it's a lab, right? So let's go ahead, now that we know where we're going to be backing things up to, let's hop on over to the actual server real quick for just a moment. Hyper-V. And yeah, so I was already messing around with things, you can see. Let's go to Z is where I mounted this. So if you haven't mounted something command line before, it's very easy to do. Net, is it set? Net use, that's right, net use. So you can see net use, I can see all the drives that I have mounted, and you can see all the ones that are for some reason disconnected right now. So let's let's go to H and see if it reconnects. So net use, you can see it reconnects once you actually go to the drive. Don't ignore the disconnected for now. But so you can just do net use, the name of the drive, and then the location. So for instance, if I wanted to mount Z and it didn't exist before, I could do net use Z and then freenas. You get the idea. freenas.home.info/backup. So that would be how you would actually get them out in place. So let's talk real briefly about what exactly it is I want the script to do, and then we'll talk about how we're going to get the script to do it. So what I want is I want every night for a full snapshot of all of my VMs to be taken. So there's a commandlet in PowerShell that lets you back up a VM. So let's go to Z and make dir test. Okay, and then plus. Yes, ls does exist in PowerShell. So you can see here, we've got our directories. Test, we're going to use what we're using to test this. So the commandlet is called export VM. So there's two actually we'll be using, get VM. And these are part of the default Hyper-V PowerShell plugin pack of commandlets. Get VM lists all your VMs in what their state is, how much memory they're using, that kind of thing. And then export VM exports a VM to a directory. So you can do export VM, and then we want to export, export Zintal, because I believe that one's smaller. Actually, you know what? pfSense is smaller. I want it to take forever. We want to export that to z:/test. And it will actually export a snapshot of the VM at its current state without having to shut it down or anything like that. And this copies, as we were talking about with good backups, this copies not just the data for the VM, but all of the configuration necessary to set it up in a new Hyper-V environment. So it's harder to import them from the command line, because if the configurations don't match between the old server and the new server, it'll freak you out a little bit. But from the GUI, it gives you a nice window and lets you walk through all the reassigning things and resetting stuff to where it needs to be. So there you go. My VM is exported, and we can go to cd test / let's just go here, and then ls. There's pfSense, and you can see I've got all of my directories there, the actual snapshots that I've taken to the VM over time, all the virtual hard disks that are attached to the machine, and the actual virtual machine state and configuration itself. So we're good to go. We have now a good backup, and it's something, well, what we need to do is we need to make these backups timely, and we need to make them something that we keep versions of. So ideally, in my world, I want to keep 7 days of snapshots. And the reason for keeping 7 days of snapshots is because if I change a configuration and I don't realize until the next day that it's busted, I may not even be able to get to it that night, but I can probably get to it within a day or two. Unless the internet's down, in which case I'm going to be told, go get it fixed until go fix it now. But I don't want to keep just one snapshot or just two snapshots, because again, if something happens, I don't want to be stuck and screwed without a good snapshot. What we want to do is we want to create a script that'll keep up to 7 days worth of snapshots, that'll do them nightly, and will snapshot all of my VMs. And we're going to do that using those two PowerShell commandlets. So what we're going to do is we're going to use the PowerShell ISE, Windows PowerShell ISE, which is really cool. It's their integrated scripting environment, which is awesome. The default actually comes with like a little thing over here, little box you can close. You don't want that. I usually switch to this maximized pane because it's just easier to work in. You can use Control R to flip back and forth. This is all stuff I got from a Microsoft tutorial video that like Microsoft actually did. It was actually really good. There was a lot of really good information in it on how to use PowerShell and how to create scripts with PowerShell. It was just campy and horrible acting. Another issue for another day, but at least I had good information, right? So to use PowerShell, basically what we can do from here is we can actually run some of the little commandlets and get information back. The only thing is this, in case you didn't notice, is on my desktop computer. It's not on my actual Hyper-V server. I want to run things as if we're on my Hyper-V server. So we need to use a different command, and I can't remember it off the top of my head. I had to use it last night. Enter PS session, that's right. So enter dash, PS. So enter PS session. Note it popped up and started giving me options. Yes, there is Intellisense. If you're used to SSMS or Visual Studio, it is very, very similar. Computer name, it knows what you probably want. And in this case, Hyper-V1. And enter. Whoops. No extra slash. Bloop. And now we're executing commands as if we're on Hyper-V1. So let's try get VM from here. And there is all of the Hyper-V VMs, virtual machines, as they're running. So that's really cool and really powerful. There's a lot of things you can do with this, this like enter PS session. And I think there's also one called invoke command that you can use to invoke a specific command against another machine. Really, really powerful stuff, especially if you have a large environment or you want to like script out to affect 20 machines or 100 machines or 10,000 machines all at once, depending on the size of your environment. But cool way to do that. But for our purposes, this is just for making sure that we are able to test our commands out as we're coding them. So, all right. So now we know we can execute things against the machine that we want to actually be executing stuff on. So let's go over and actually write our script. So let's break it down before we actually start writing any real code and break it down into the sections of the things that we want to do. I find this is really helpful, especially if I'm not 100% familiar with the language, is to just kind of semantically break it out. What is it I'm trying to accomplish? And then what am I going to need to do to accomplish it? So I know I wanted to get all of my VMs, export them all, and I want to do it on this like 7-day cycle. Now doing it on that 7-day cycle means I'm going to need some variables in terms of dates. So we're going to do, first we're going to need to set some variables. So let's start with commenting out each of the blocks as we need to do them. So we need to set variables. Well, they're really date variables. All right, so once we have our date variable set, we're next probably going to want to go ahead and make the directory that we're going to be putting these things in. To make it simpler, I'm kind of keeping everything in dated directories. So like there's one directory that has all of the VM snapshots for that day. So let's make our date directory. Make directory. And then after we make our directory, whoops, we want to, what's next? Next, we want to actually get our list of VMs. Get list of VMs. Once we have our list of VMs, we want to actually execute the snapshots. I can't type today, guys. And then, or not execute. Execute's really the wrong term. Gather snapshots. And then finally, we want to remove our old directories. So essentially what I'm planning to do is set it up as a dumb system where it creates a dated folder, a date named folder, and then it will create one for the current day, and then it'll delete one that is 7 days old. And there are of course a million ways that can come off the rails, but for this simple of an environment, it should work fine. It may need to be manually cleaned up from time to time. It's not going to be a foolproof system. There are certainly more things you could do in terms of like querying the list of directories within a specific directory and finding anything that is deleting the oldest until you only have 7 left. Would definitely be a more thorough way of doing it. But for now, let's just do it the fast way and get it done. So delete old snapshot. Okay. So straight one. Let's start at the beginning, getting our date variables. So really, we're gonna have two variables here. We're gonna have a current date and a last date. So guys, what we'll call it. So PowerShell, if you didn't see my tweet about it earlier, it's kind of this weird amalgamation of not only, you know, its own kind of commandlet structure, as well as, command line, regular DOS shell commands and bash shell commands, but also there's the concept of methods and of overloading something in the same way that you would with a language like C#. So it's a really kind of almost super complex language that you can do weird and crazy things with. And we're actually going to explore most of the weirdness with this one. So buckle up. So there's a command. Let's go over here. That called get date, I believe. Yes. So get date. That gives you the current date. That's not really what we want to be naming things, though, because for one, it's got a time factor in it. And if I try and name a folder this, it's got commas and all sorts of weird shit. It's probably going to break. It's not going to work. Really what I want is I want an ISO date format without dashes. It's probably the most simple way to do it. So let's do this. Let's do get date. So when you put something in parentheses like this, it's almost the same as putting something in backticks in bash. It executes everything within the parentheses as its own command, and then you can either pipe that to a different command or overload the output of that command. In this case, the output of get date is a date value, so we can overload that, or we can use a method on top of that we can then, make changes to it. So in this case, I want to take this date and let's do the actual date. So that strips the time off of it. We want to we want to do another method on top of that date, which is we took the date time and smushed it down to a date. And now we want to take it to a string. So to string, there we go. And again, look, you can overload it just like you can with C#. So in this case, if the first overload method for toString is the actual format that you want, very, very simple formatting, year, month, day. And this is just, if you've done C# programming, you'll know that that's how you format a regular date string with the string command. So here you go. We've got our ISO format like I wanted, year, month, day, very simple. Now if I want to do the same thing, if I want to do the same thing, but I want to change the date, right? What I can do is I can come back here and I can add another thing in the middle. We're going to add day, and in this case I want to add -7 days. Oh wait, there we go, days, plural. So I can add -7 days, which is one of the possible overload methods for a date or date time, and I can then go back 7 days and say, now I have my current date and my last date for when I'm going through and processing the backup. So let's go ahead and copy these commands and get them over to, oh wait, that's the one that failed. Let's get that. There's our current date and our last date. Now this is probably not, again, the best way to be doing this, but it's what I like to think of as, I call it functional coding, but I know there's functional programming, that's like a whole different thing. But practical coding, just coding to get the job done, essentially. And yes, it's probably not best practice, but it's usually good enough, again, to get the job done, and it lets you really accomplish your goals faster, which usually in a business setting you just want to get it done, and that's what people are looking for, is results. So it can be good to know how to code like that, even if you aren't following best practice and maybe aren't doing things the most efficient way or the best way. If it's done and it's functional, it's what the business needs, it's done and it's functional. There we go. So let's go ahead. Next step is to make our directory. So let's make dir, And just like in Bash, you can throw a variable anywhere in a string and it will use the variable there as part of the string. So current date. Oh yeah. Like I was saying, you can feed a variable directly into a string just like you can with Bash. So let's make up a variable. We'll call it test var, and it equals test folder, right? And then if I want to make a directory, test var, right? It's going to make test folder. Now you can take that a step further and you can include it somewhere within the string, and test var other folder, and it will actually make it everywhere within. You can see within test folder, other folder. It totally is fine with parsing all that out. So that $, it's a little bit more intelligent in Bash in that it recognizes the $, it recognizes all this text up into the next special character just fine. I've not tested. Let me try something because I'm curious now. Test var. Wait, 2. Yes. Okay, so it works exactly like Bash, where curly braces can limit a variable, or can call out a variable within the middle of a text string. So just like Bash, variables are just like Bash. That's all you need to know for the purposes of text strings. So let's go ahead and remove that. rm_dir r recurse and test folder. All right, cool. So this make dir z current date, good to go, no issues there. Next, we need to get a list of our VMs. Well, to do that, we already know get VM shows me the VMs that are on the machine here in this name column, but how do I actually get them out of that name column? Because, I mean, that's not terribly helpful if I just want the name of the VMs. So we can actually use pipe just like you would in Bash, and we can pipe out and send it to another command. And this command we're going to use is actually select. Kind of sounds like SQL, doesn't it? And in this case, we want to select name. Look at that. So let's see if we can take this a step further. Let's do this. Bam. Just the names, not even within an associative array. So what you can see that I'm doing here is I'm building up these commands. So we've got the get VM command that we're piping to select, which is actually the full name of that is the commandlet select object, select-object. It's just this select is a shorthand form. It makes it look like SQL, but it's not SQL. It's actually a PowerShell commandlet. And so, yeah, that one was a bit of a doozy for me. I thought they were doing something really crazy and cool, but they weren't. Well, it is crazy and cool. Anyway, I digress. So I'm using get VM, which gives me all this data, and I'm selecting out just the name, which is just this column. And what this is right here is an associative array. And what I'm doing is I'm putting that within parentheses to make it a single command. I'm taking the associative array output of that command, and I am using I'm using a method to get just the name portion of the array, and of the name portion of the associative array, which gives me an array of just the name objects right here. So that's a really cool way to kind of get down to just the information that you want. So we're going to go ahead and use this guy. It's going to vary just a tiny bit, actually, now that I think about it, from what I was doing previously. And we want to have a variable that we're feeding this to. We'll call this VM lists equals that. So my VM list is going to be the output of that array. So now I want to actually gather the snapshots. And to do that, we can do just a simple for loop. For, and we'll call this, I want to call it VM in VM list, for VM in VM list, and then curly brace, close with curly brace. So what this is going to do is for each VM in VM list. Is that the right syntax? Oh, for each. There. All right. So for each VM in VM list, we want to execute a command. In this case, we're going to do export VM. We want to export the VM named VM. And we want to export it to z/ current date, which was and of course tab completion. It's great. So this is going to export the VM out of the list, and it's going to put it in the export of that VM into this current date folder. Now, the way that export VM commandlet works, as we saw earlier, it creates a folder named for the VM and puts all of the other information in that subfolder. So we'll have the dated folder, the actual VM within it, and then all the VM's data. Sweet. So that's going to actually do all of our, we're there now. We've got all of our backups. They're all going to run. And the last thing to do is to get rid of the folder from the previous backup that is now 7 days old. So what we want to do is we want to delete the directory that we no longer need. So to do that, what is it? I forget, there's another commandlet that I used. Remove item, that's right. Move item. So we're going to remove item z/ last date force -recurse. So what this is going to do is this is going to delete that entire directory. It's going to do it recursively, meaning all the subdirectories and all the files underneath, and it's going to force it, meaning don't talk about it, just do it. Since we're running this as a script that is going to be executed by a scheduled task, we don't want to have it throwing prompts and not actually completing. So let's save this where we can get to it on the server. So you can see I've got my other VM backup. So VM backup video. Save that. And then let's hop over to our server, and we can go to H and dir. Dir and ls are synonyms. They do the exact same thing. And you can see there's VM backup video right here, and we can just simply run it to backup video. This is one other thing, digitally signing scripts. So by default, your Hyper-V or Windows Server installation is going to only allow digitally signed scripts. In this case, you can see we didn't digitally sign it, so it's freaking out. There is a command you can run to turn off that check for digitally signed scripts and allow it to run. Now we can go through the process of actually digitally signing everything and making it all, tick and tie and yay, but I'm not that worried about doing that. I just want to actually get something functional and running. So right now we're going to tell it run once, and it's going to go through, it's going to actually back up all of our VMs. And it's going to do it to this 626 directory that it's creating for the purpose of it. So there you go. We've got it set. It's going to run all the, it's going to do all the VMs there. And then once it's done, we can put it on a scheduled task. Okay, it's done. Wow. Sweet. Okay, so this error at the end is because it was trying to remove that directory. That directory doesn't exist because I've only been running it for 2 days now. So let's go over to Z and let's go back to here and remove item, remove item test, curse, force. Okay, so let's get rid of that test directory, and let's go. Let's look at the directory real quick. You can see I've got my 2 dated folders and then the script folder. So let's go into the script folder real quick. And here's the script that I previously made. It's basically the exact same thing. We can look at it here in a second and look at the differences. And let's go to, what do we want to do here? We want to unblock the item. Unblock file, VM backup 1. All right. So now that file should be unblocked and we should be able to run without issues. So let's go, well, we're not going to worry about doing it, testing it again. The last thing, of course, is to actually set it up so that it is a scheduled task. Action equals new scheduled task action to execute. And then, fortunately, there's no arguments for this, so I just want to execute z:/ VM script VM backup 1. So I just want to execute my VM backup power thing here. There's no arguments to it, so I don't need to add that argument line. I just need to execute it. And then we want another variable called a trigger. And that trigger is going to equal a new scheduled task trigger. And that is going to be daily at, well, we'll do this at 1 a.m. No one should be awake. Okay. And then we actually want to register scheduled task action equals action, and trigger is trigger, and task name will be VM daily backup. I like descriptive task names so that when I see it, VM daily backup, that tells me everything I need to know about it. And then description will be daily VM full backup. There we go. Okay. State ready. Cool. All right. So that should take care of it. That should run. We'll, of course, have to check and make sure that it actually runs at 1 a.m. tonight. But it should run, and it should create a backup for us. Let's see. I'm just curious because I want to test this and make sure it's actually going to run from the scheduled task. So PowerShell run scheduled task. Scheduled task. How to run. Blah, blah, blah. That's not what I need. PowerShell to run. Start scheduled task. Start scheduled task. And then, actually, before I do this, OS remove item. So we actually need to remove the existing backup folder before we do it. Otherwise, it'll conflict because there's a folder, there's a directory already, blah, blah, blah. So 2018, 26, curse force. That's going to take a minute to actually delete because it's like 40 or 50 gigs worth of data. Okay, there we go. So now we can start scheduled task VM daily backup. Oh, so we are gonna have to do a execute PowerShell, and then argument is z:/script/VM backup 1. That is actually our action now. My bad. So we have to execute PowerShell with the argument of that VM backup 1. Unregister. Schedule task. And then are you sure you want to perform this action? Yes. Okay. So let's do that action. Where's our trigger? Yep. And then we actually want to register the new task with the new action and the new everything there. And we want to start scheduled task VM daily backup. Okay. Balls. Oh, it's because it's in a network share. Oh. So we can add that, huh? Let's do that. File. And then yes. So we already set action. Let's reset trigger just in case. Register, and then start scheduled task. VM daily backup. Yay! All right. So our scheduled task is now correctly executing. It's going to create all of our backups, and we are golden. The only thing you could do on top of this, if you really wanted to, was logging so that you knew what was happening with the execution of it and have it write out 2 log files. It's actually making the directory, backing up this VM, backing up that VM, backing up that VM. So if you get an error, you know what the error is. So yeah, that's about the only other thing you can do on top of what we've already done. It makes me feel so much better, guys. It's going to be really cool to come back and check on this in a week and see and validate that it's actually deleting the directories like it's supposed to be doing. So awesome. Very cool. Well, let's hop back over and close this guy out.
All right, guys. Well, I gotta say, I feel a whole lot better knowing that I've got a real path to recovery if something ever happens to my home environment again, and I won't be, at least hopefully, cross fingers, knock on wood, won't be spending an entire weekend rebuilding everything from the ground up. I hope you enjoyed this video and found it helpful. I hope that it encourages you to start backing up things in your environment and making sure that you have a path to recovery if anything ever goes wrong. As we all know in the Homelabing community, the wife acceptance factor for the Homelab is a huge deal. And you don't want to be the guy whose home internet is down for 2 or 3 days straight because you tried to get a little too fancy or you misconfigured something and all of a sudden you broke the internet. If you enjoyed this video, please throw a like on it. Also, leave any comments or questions you have for me in the comment section down below. If you'd like to support my channel, you can do so by using the Amazon or the eBay affiliate links in the description section. And if you would like to see more content like this in the future, hit that subscribe button. Alright guys, thanks for watching, and we'll see you on the next one.